Hi, y'all. We're taking a look at Chapter 3 in our text, and this is specifically for our examination of learning environments and setting up positive, structured, scaffolded learning environments for our students. Specifically in Chapter 3, we're taking a look at creating positive, supportive, interactive relationships between the educator and students in the classroom. We know that it's very important to create those structures so that students feel safe, they feel supported, that they want to learn. For the most part, we know that students are not going to pay attention to what we know until they know that we care about them. That's some of the struggle that we often have as we try to support learners in the classroom, is that we try to skip through straight to the content and we try to believe or hope that our students are going to learn just because they're supposed to. So in many ways, especially if we work with adolescents, there needs to be an indication as to the why, in addition to the what and the how of learning. But then in all environments, K-12 and higher ed, we also want to focus on a lot of the things that we discussed in previous chapters, thinking about does the student feel safe? Do they feel secure? Are their needs met? But basically, we're going to think about those teacher-student relationships and try to make sure that we have positive ones that support the learners. In Chapter 3, once again, we're going to focus on a lot of the research involved in teacher-student relationships. We're going to talk about some specific strategies we can use to build community. We have to have discussions about what community really means, or whether or not you believe it's your responsibility to have or to inspire community or help scaffold or structure community. We're going to talk about culturally relevant pedagogy and how to safely, effectively, responsibly bring the cultures of different students into our classrooms. We're going to talk a little bit about your expectations and belief structures and think about what that really means to you. It's important to recognize that our classrooms, the classroom environment, the learning environment, really is a little petri dish. There are a lot of interactions that are occurring. There's a lot of feedback loops that impact success or failure or indifference or achievement in our classroom. And it's important to think about those different contexts and think about what role we play in that, what role the individual students or their peers play in that. And then last but not least, the content. What is the belief structure around the content? So as an example, if we think about the student in the middle of this interaction loop, the positive end or negative relationship or interactions between the teacher is going to impact the way that the teacher feels about the class and also the teacher, and willingness to perform in the classroom, willingness to be a part of the classroom. The student is also going to think about other peers in the classroom. So if the student looks around and peers don't really take the class seriously, or if there's some bullying happening, if there's competition or other value structures in the classroom, the student might not really want to perform or be involved in the class, and that's going to impact the way that they perform in the class or succeed or achieve or just tune out. Last but not least, there's also some interaction between the content and the student. So as an example, the student may believe or have been told in the past that they were not a good reader or a writer. They might believe that science is only for specific genders. They might believe that math is too hard. Whatever the case may be, the student's conceptions or misconceptions or preconceptions about that content is going to impact their willingness to engage with the content. And so we need to be cognizant of those different interaction loops and understand that it's more than just the kids can't get it, or more than just they're not trying hard enough. So we want to be aware of that and try and create space or create opportunities to have positive classroom relationships. So when we're thinking about positive classroom relationships, we're thinking about the role and structure of these in our class. We have to think about students of teachers who are warm demanders, that have that profile, as that persona as they enter the classroom. So we're going to think about these students. They generally, the teachers who are warm demanders of their students, generally these students have higher achievement levels. They for the most part, experience less absenteeism, meaning they show up. They show up, they want to achieve, they want to do work for you, they want to succeed for you. Depending on the student, but depending on the environment, the student might want to show up and succeed just for you. They don't really care as much about their own performance, but it's just the culture and it's your expectations as the educator. For the most part, we see evidence that teachers that are quote unquote warm demanders, their students are going to engage in fewer disruptive issues, so fewer classroom management issues and disciplinary issues. We generally see students showing greater participation and engagement, and they generally suggest that they like school more for whatever that means. So it's important to understand that warm demander's role of the teacher that they detail in the text and figure out, okay, what's really happening there and how might we bake that into what we do. Trust is an important commodity in the classroom. Trust, we generally see it as something that either does or does not exist. The truth of the matter is that trust can be built. Trust can also very quickly disappear in the classroom. And it's a lot of the components that we already talked about. It's you as the educator, as the instructor, what actions do you have? What are the other ecological elements that are occurring in the classroom? What are the other interactions and how do they positively and or negatively impact learning in the classroom, interactions in the classroom, and overall trust in the classroom? And then how do students interact with this? So in terms of net trust in that classroom, there's little things that are going to add and subtract from it on a daily basis. There's going to be words that come out of your mouth that are either absolutely perfect and on point and you did a great job, or you might say one thing, or act one way a certain day, and it really negatively impacts trust in the classroom. Trust is seen as an equation that is a sum result of individual students, the teacher, and then the compounding addition of all the other students. So there are days that I teach, even in higher ed, and something will happen in the classroom that I need to address, and I don't have time that day in class or that night in class. For whatever reason, I move on and I don't address it. And I need to come back the very next class, the very next time I see them, and I need to address that because I think of it as currency. I think of it as being relationship currency with individual members of the class. And the goal is to generally increase positive feelings and decrease negative interactions. So understanding that, I might see out of the 20 students, 24 students in the class, I might see generally 20 are buying what I'm selling and they're really digging what's happening in the classroom, but I might have 1, 2, 3, 4 students that really don't connect and they're not getting involved. And we really cannot, it's hard for us to engage with all students, but we can't chalk those 2, 3, 4 students up to, well, they just don't get it. They're not part of the community, because that will negatively impact what's happening in the class over time. In terms of how to build relationships, I generally like to start from a place of positivity. I generally believe that all students want to learn. I know that there are many times that this is not a very popular point of view. I generally believe that students want to learn. I've taught pretty much everywhere. I've taught every type of child out there, and I value those experiences. And I can say without a shadow of a doubt, pretty much every single student wants to learn. And so coming from that place of positivity, we like to identify individual granular moments where students are successful. Let's celebrate success. Life is too short. Be constructive at all times, identify opportunities for improvement, but let's acknowledge success when we see it because we don't often see it. And so for all students, you need to find those opportunities to identify success. Yes, still be critical. Yes, still be constructive. But, at times provide for students that complement sandwich. We also need to encourage positive self-talk in our students, especially when they're struggling. Especially with our adolescents, we see a lot of our adolescents suffer from negative self-image. They have challenges with mental health or the way they view themselves. We're seeing a lot of this negativity and signs of depression and signs of some trauma reaching back into elementary. So we're seeing evidence of students that are in first, second, third grade showing evidence of trauma and negative self-image. And so it's important for you as the educator, as one of the adults in this child's life, to encourage positive self-talk, to have them think about what they're really good at and think better about themselves. We don't do that enough. We often just focus on the content and focus on some of the frameworks and the standards. And the truth of the matter is that what we think about ourselves really does matter. We need to acknowledge the fact that every little push, every little bit adds up to creating a more positive, more engaged learner. There's other components that are out there. There's other factors out there. But I really believe that just, the power of positive thinking goes a long way. We often ignore that as something that's not measurable and it's not in this data-driven economy, but we have to recognize the power of positive thoughts. We also want to think about the power of language. I'm a literacy educator and researcher. I think a lot about language. I think about language use and the impact of the words that come out of our mouths. I guarantee you, as an educator at any level, you're going to say things that really you did not mean to say. The opportunity then is there to go back and revisit that language or revisit that moment and model for your students what you did well or what you did poorly or what you could have done differently, because your students are trying to figure out how do they deal with troublesome situations. So we want to think about invitational and disinvitational language. It's very simple, but we want to create a culture of flexibility, cognitive flexibility, growth mindset, and grit, and generally thinking that, there are, making mistakes is all right in our classroom. That's absolutely okay. That we learn from mistakes. That you're not lousy at something, that you presently struggle with something. That we can find the words to express what we want to say. In K-12 and in higher ed, we need to guide others. We need to think about apprenticing others as they figure out how to act, the words to use, and how to engage in society. We don't all know everything all at once. Even in higher ed, even I deal with this on a daily basis. I'm still trying to think through what words to use and how to explain certain things. And it's also important to figure out who out there can help us. So if we presently struggle with something, what do we do as normal human beings in a network society? If I have a challenge, I reach out to colleagues and friends of mine that know how to deal with it or might know the answer. I reach out to, in my own personal and professional life, I reach out to social media, I reach out to Twitter, I research, I reach out to colleagues and friends that may not be on social media, but I go find the answer and inform myself, and that really should never stop, even as we leave K-12. We also hear this term empathy or empathetic being thrown around right now. We believe that the world would be a better place if we had more empathy. The challenge is that we need to identify opportunities to be active, engaged listeners. And there's often there is a difference between that. So for the most part, we want to make sure that we're actively listening to our students. There's a difference between listening and hearing. I do this poorly on a regular basis, but we want to make sure that we are actively listening and we really are paying attention to and hearing and understanding and holding space for other individuals as they talk. We often don't do that as much as we should. And many times your students, you're the only person that might really listen to them and just stop and hold them for a moment in your thoughts. So do you really listen to your students? And one of the things that I try to do is, can you reframe, can you restructure their expressions, their narrative, their thoughts in a different context? So the example here is, I know that you're really upset over the spelling game, and this can be entering any part of their lives. You know, I know you're upset with your math teacher. I know you're upset with the assistant principal. I know that you're upset with your friend, or losing the spelling game, or failing the test. How might we address this situation differently in the future? And so game situations out with our students and try and create opportunities to reflect on what happened. And then it's also important to try and be non-judgmental in the response. This involves a lot of nonverbal behavior. So this involves if you're paying attention to the student or not, if you're looking miserable and pain when they're telling you stories about what's happening at home or out in the hallways or at lunchtime. Your students pick up on this. Your students know who cares about them and who does not. As we said before, they're more than often they are willing to be there for you if they feel like you care about them. And it's hard because you may not. In that case, we have to figure out, why you're there, but it can be a challenge. I'm not going to give it short shrift. It could be a challenge. It can drain you at times, but try to be there, try to be present, try and restructure or reframe the question, or ask the student to reframe it for you so you can better understand. And then be non-judgmental. Give them your opinion and focus on that nonverbal behavior and figure out better ways to connect with them. Thinking about better ways to connect, we want to think about spending time individually with students. I try as hard as I can to do this in some of my classes. I'll stop by class, I'll open up the room 10-15 minutes early and try and check in with students and recognize, okay, these two students over in this side of the room, I haven't talked to them at all this semester. I haven't talked to them in a couple of weeks. So try to circulate through the room, and this is important, K-12 and on up. Try and spend some quality time, 10-15 minutes every couple of weeks to check in. How are you doing as a human being? How is your life? Are you okay? Are you happy? Are you mentally and physically okay? Try and bank time with individuals to make sure that they feel connected to what's happening in the classroom. Try and be student-driven. Be that active listener that we talked about. Emphasize open communication. Try and create that environment to show that you care with them. And then one of the areas that I struggle with is that you really can't withhold time as a punishment for them. So it's not appropriate to say, okay, because you're not behaving in class, I'm not going to pay any attention to you, or I'm not going to be there to support you or answer your questions and stuff like that. We have to recognize that our students are learners. They are individuals. They are there to try and figure out better ways to exist and succeed, or perhaps just survive our classrooms. Different ways to do this. Greet the students at the door. Think about student interest, show up for sporting events, show up for after-school activities, run an after-school club, play on the playground. It's okay. You will endear yourself with students if you're out in the playground playing with them. I've been thoroughly embarrassed in multiple student staff, volleyball games, basketball games, track and field activities. Students love it when you step out of the comfort zone and show them that you're a human being and that you care about what they care about. Eat lunch with students. It probably will go a long way if you eat lunch a couple times a marking period or a semester with your students as opposed to the teacher's lounge. Send positive letters or notes home. I can tell you as a parent that goes very far, getting little notes in the mail from the teacher, just positive notes saying what a great job or what a great semester or year they had. One of the other things that works out well in the classroom is the suggestion box. There's an opportunity to have a little unvarnished opinion from students, a suggestion box for use in the classroom. And then also it's important to use praise and feedback. If a student's doing something well in the classroom and you feel like they don't often get the positive support in the classroom, give a shout out to the entire classroom and say what a great job one individual did. That will float that student for a couple days or a couple weeks. Make sure that your feedback, your praise, your critique is contingent, specific, and credible. Make sure it is contingent. This goes back to our look at behaviorism. It should immediately follow the desired behavior. So try and immediately, if a student answers a question or reads aloud or looks something up or has some sort of behavior or disposition that you've been looking for, you immediately follow up and give them that positive support. Make sure that it is specific. You tell them exactly what you like about what they just did, and then it should be credible. It should be appropriate. It should be right on spot. They should know exactly what it's for and why they're getting that good feedback. In terms of poor feedback, we get a lot of poor feedback in our lives. We don't get as much critical feedback as we really do need. As an educator, I regularly struggle with this. I try to improve upon this, but I definitely struggle with this. Poor feedback, numerical grades are really bad examples. A number grade, even a letter grade, doesn't really help us out. Good job, good work, keep it up. You need to tighten up this part of the paper. But basically, this is also true when we come to disciplinary problems. If you're disciplining a child, you want to be very specific as to what the infraction is. So the example here is much after there's some sort of violence in the classroom, you tell a student that they need to stay inside because they were mean earlier. You want to be very specific and indicate what it's for. We see behavioral systems being used in our classrooms. We have star students, we have happy grams, we have little notes, we have positive points that students can gather and garner over time. We see behavioral feedback systems set up in our classroom so students and or classes can earn points to get things in the classroom. So as an example, you might say, okay, if we see a student that is quiet or a class in the hallway that's quiet, students can get individual points, and then every marking period, the class that has the most points or the student that has the most points get something. They might get something that is extra time at lunch or a day off, or, not a day off, but, extra, an afternoon movie or something. So we see these behavioral systems where students basically earn points for exhibiting these behaviors that you would like to see in your classroom. There's other ways to make connections with students. We have situations where we need to make decisions about openness, about sharing parts about our lives. This is often a struggle. You individually first have to decide how much you're going to share or are willing to share about your life. This especially comes into context when you deal with adolescents. Do you want to share with students some of the challenges and struggles you had growing up? Or do you want to keep that to yourself? Is it too much information, or is it about right? There's also questions about touching. There's questions about touching, different grade bands. So students that are in early childhood or elementary or middle grades or secondary often have very different viewpoints about whether or not touching is appropriate. So as a middle school or high school teacher, we might look askance when we see an early childhood teacher giving a hug to a student or positive support. So it's important with touching to show positivity and connection, but you want to think about how you feel, how comfortable you feel about being open or touching students. You want to think about how you feel. You want to also think about the school and the district policy. Is touching, is a hug, is a hand on the shoulder, is a handshake or a high five or a fist bump appropriate? All of our schools, all of our districts have different policies about what is appropriate. If and when, and you should have questions about what is appropriate, you're going to want to talk to leaders in your building and make sure you know what's appropriate, and weigh that with your own feelings of comfort for openness and sharing about yourself, but also physical contact. You need to make sure that you understand what's appropriate and what you are comfortable with, and make sure that you want to pay attention to what it looks like as a third party there in the situation. So not you, not the student, but what would someone else think if they saw you? So you want to think about developing relationships in your classroom. You want to think about building connections. You want to create that sense that the student feels that they are connected. At-risk students do not often feel that they are connected to the environment, so they want to feel connection, that they will be missed if they are not there. So a lot of our students don't feel like it matters if they're there or not. They want to feel that someone cares about them. As the classroom teacher, you're there 180 days out of the year. So are you that individual that generally cares if your students are there or not? And then last but not least, do they feel competent? Do they feel like they can succeed? Do they feel that they make a difference in that classroom, and they can do well, and that together with you and with your support, they can do well? So it's important to think about why we are in the classroom. It's important to think about our job to guide and support and scaffold learners. Part of our job is the focus on the content. Part of our job is to assess and give feedback. Part of our job is to make sure students make it through the day in one piece and they go home or wherever they go in one piece. Part of our job is to spend 180 days of the school year with them and try and do the best that we can to support them. But there's more to it. And there's more as we think about what our job is and how we are creating the future, individuals on this planet. And thinking about what our role is in that, what our expectations are in that, and then understanding what we come into this whole experience with. What baggage do we have? Because we are also human beings. We've had successes, we've had failures. Every single one of us brings our own baggage into the classroom every day. And so I think that it's important that we take stock of that. And just as we think in the classroom that community is a form of currency and trust is a form of currency, we want to think about our identity and privilege and perspective and try and make sense of all that and how we might use that as currency or leverage to help other individuals. And so that's part of the challenge here is, and the reason why we ask you all to dig in deeper and reflect more is because we need to think about ourselves first before we start thinking about and guiding other individuals. So when we think about our expectations, we want to think about what we believe about our students. We want to think about our expectations and the baggage that we bring into the classroom. We want to think about whether or not we think that certain learners can do well. This might be based upon age, race, socioeconomic status, ethnicity, pretty much any descriptor that we want. Do you raise or lower your expectations of students based upon the type of students that you are interacting with? And so we notice this effect when you walk into a classroom and you believe, well, those types of learners, we immediately raise or lower our expectations. So if we walk into a room with students that are talented and gifted or labeled with this designation, do we believe that these students are at a higher level? So we try to teach them, better. Or if we walk in and we say, well, those are students with special needs, I'm not going to try as hard with them. Do we have that mindset and try to raise or lower our expectations? This also talks about different districts. I often work with students that say, well, I want to go to this type of school because those students will get it. They'll get what I'm teaching. And so we have to acknowledge that and think about what we're really saying. And so when we think about teachers of low achievers, most times we see that educators in these spaces don't show much affection. They keep physical distance. They look like they're afraid to be there, offer less feedback and less guidance. They, especially learners from culturally diverse backgrounds, they are given less praise and more criticism. And so if we think about learners that are typically identified as low achievers and possibly are from culturally diverse backgrounds, what is it doing to those individuals when we're not giving them a lot of affection? We're staying at a distance and looking like we're afraid of them. We're not really giving positive feedback and we're critiquing them more harshly. What is it doing to those individuals? Okay, is it giving them the opportunities and the guidance that they really do need? Or are we pushing them back a little bit more? So we really want to think about the ways we interact with those learners. And most of that is our own epistemological, ontological, our own perspectives about those individuals. When we think about diverse populations, it's often a struggle for us. We don't like talking about difference. In the text, we talk about different categories, and we want to think about the considerations about each of those categories. In our classrooms, we are adults. Many times you are the lone adult in the classroom. So as an adult, we need to use terminology that is specific and correct. So when we talk about race and ethnicity, we need to understand that we are talking about many times Black, Indigenous, people of color. We're talking about students of color. We are not using the term minority. When we talk about socioeconomic status, we want to think about the value of education in these environments. And we want to recognize the fact that socioeconomic status is often an indicator of what the parents have in terms of school experience or their own learning pathways and what brought them to that space. When we talk about gender, we want to think about a lot of the indoctrination of and the place of gender in our schools. And we want to think about gender in society. And do we have specific expectations in terms of how boys and girls learn and experience differently? We also have to look at gender as a fluid construct, meaning that gender, for many, is not a binary male-female construct. And so we might see learners that fluidly move across the gender spectrum. We might see learners that identify or choose to self-identify in different ways that may not be indicated in our binary perspectives. We also want to think about linguistically diverse individuals. Individuals that come into our classrooms and English is not their primary language. They might be non-native English speakers, or they might be multilingual. They might come from another country and they are learning English. And so this will present challenges as they seek to communicate verbally and in written format in our classroom. Sometimes we look at that and we think that these students are just not getting it, or they, are, having challenges in our classroom when it might be a literacy component. We also want to think about religious differences. We want to think about different faiths that individuals may have, and the impact of that in our classroom, and whether or not it will preclude them from engaging in some of this. So typically in our class, we'll think about different cultural gestures and components of our world. We'll talk more about this in our online space. We think about culturally responsive teaching. We want to understand that culturally responsive educators confront bias, and they seek to understand differences in backgrounds. So a lot of times, to be a culturally responsive educator, or to think about CRT, we want to notice and name bias when we see it in our classroom. We want to actively speak out against bias, and just indicate exactly when it's happening. And we talked earlier about self-study. We want to seek and understand differences in individual backgrounds. In CRT, we want to use active teaching styles. We want to be active and engaging and involve students in learning. We want to create this sense of community that we've talked about in the earlier chapters, and identify opportunities to communicate with all students and bank that time. And then also we want to try and avoid excessive use of punishments. We want to, the Bart Simpson writing out things on the chalkboard, or a lot of the punitive punishments, we want to try and avoid some of those regular punishments just for the sake of punishing students. We think about CRT, we also want to think about opportunities to authentically embed culture in the classroom so that students see themselves in the content. We want to think about do students see individuals or authors that look and sound like them in what they're studying? Do they see, different races, ethnicities, genders? Do they see other individuals? Do they see diversity in the content that is authentically embedded in there? And then also not just an add-on. It's not just, well, this is, Mexican Day, or this is Argentina Day. Is it something that is regularly woven into the content for the year? And then also understanding that cultural differences do exist. There are things that make us different. There are things that make me different from you, that make you different from your neighbor. That's appropriate. That's acceptable. But there's also similarities. There is a common shared human experience. And we want to try and identify those as well. So there are cultural differences that are wonderful, that we can celebrate. One way to connect with students is, when you're teaching in an area, ask what people have for breakfast, or ask what we have for dinner at home, or, what types of food are in the area that you can go appreciate and learn more about. It could be music as well. Depends on what your interests lie in. How willing are you to connect with students? And it's important to understand that no one person's narrative is correct or incorrect. It's important to know that my narrative is not correct or incorrect because I am a white male, that we need to find opportunities to coexist, and we won't all be right and we won't all be wrong. We'll dig more into approaches for CRT. There are different ways to have this happen in the classroom. We can have students write autobiographies. We can look at different literacy tales and chapter books and children's books. We can think about oral presentations and debates in the classroom. We can have students interview each other or interview individuals at home, interview brothers or sisters or family members. Artwork and creative pursuits are incredible opportunities to dig into different cultures. Small group collaboration. You can set up online e-pals and Skype pals so people can talk with others around the globe. So as a classroom teacher, you might have a friend that is also a teacher in Spain or in China, and they can connect with others. So there's different ways to have this operate where your students can see different experiences and different narratives that they might not have in their own lives. It's also important to have fun. Many times in our classroom, the F word that we don't want to hear is fail, but a lot of times the F word that we should hear more of, and we don't hear enough of is fun. So have fun in your classroom. You are there for 180 days in the year. Your students are, for the most part, there for 180 days also. Have fun. Be creative. Have your students up and moving and be physical. I believe that humor is a vital component of the classroom. So allow and expect laughter. God forbid. It's okay to have a noisy classroom. It's one of those Rorschach tests to a certain extent. When you walk by a classroom that's noisy, is that a good or a bad thing? I always believe that that was a good thing. Many of my school administrators did not agree. Provide voice and choice in assessments, voice and choice in materials. Ask students to submit materials you might study. And then weave that into your learning. Weave that into your course content. If a student suggests, and I have this happen in my classes now. I teach a slam poetry class as an FYE, and I have students that say, this would be a great poem or a song or an album that you might want to include, or a piece of art. I had this happen in my other classes as well, and I'll work it into the content because it shows that one learner that you think that they are special, and you believe they are a benefit to the classroom. So one of the things that we're going to want to think about is your own teacher beliefs. We're going to think about your teacher beliefs as you prepare for your classroom management plan. You're going to want to think about your backpack. You're going to want to think about your perspectives and beliefs as you enter the classroom or as you're in the classroom. And think about those student interactions. Think about your belief structure. What is your job? What should you be doing as a classroom teacher, as an educator? And start to list off some of this stuff. Keep this private, keep this close to the vest, because I want you to be as personal as possible. This is not something that you will ultimately turn in. This will be a roadmap for you as you develop your classroom management plan. But think about your belief structure. What do you really believe? And keep this personal. Keep this to your vest, close to your vest. What do you believe in? Why do you believe it? Do you believe things about students because of socioeconomic status or race or gender? You can be honest with yourself. We're not going to see this. I'm not going to see this. So what do you believe? Why do you believe this to be true? What evidence do you have that this is a valid belief? And then probably the most important, what's this going to look like in your classroom? Okay, so if you believe that all students with glasses are smarter and they do well, they achieve more in your classroom, and anytime that you believe that a student with glasses is in front of you, you believe that they are generally smarter than everybody else. Why do you believe that? What evidence do you have? I mean, you might have incredible evidence, and that's your deal. Why do you believe it to be true? And then what's it going to look like? What does that ultimately mean for your classroom? Does it mean that you're going to prepare for those students that have glasses? Are you going to look for those students and give them extra special treatment? Are you going to bring those students with glasses to the front of the classroom? because you want them right up front so you can witness their magnificence. What else does it look like? What will it look like in your future classroom? What expectations will you have? Will you hand out glasses? If a student's struggling, will they wear glasses to see if they can be successful? So I will stop giving my glasses example so that people that are wearing glasses are not upset right now, or feel really good about themselves. But what do you believe? Why? What's the evidence? And what's this going to look like? So as we wrap up chapter 3, you want to think about caring relationships with students. How can we create and sustain these? How can we create spaces so that students feel that they are cared for, that they can believe in themselves? We want to model responsibility. You are the adult in the equation. Many times you are the lone adult in the equation. We want to model responsibility and make sure that we show learners, we show youth positive ways to engage with conflict and stress and resolution. We want to provide substantive feedback. We want to be critical, but then also positive and supportive and timely. We want to communicate high expectations for all learners. All learners in our classroom can achieve. I believe that. You have to make your own decision. So how do we communicate that to our learners? We want to try and find authentic opportunities to embed the lives of students into our classroom, into our instructional texts, into our instructional processes, into assessment mechanisms, so that they feel like they are a valuable member of the class and not just an add-on. And last but not least, please make learning fun. Have fun in your classroom. Life is too short. Times are hard for many people. Make learning fun. Make it enjoyable. So with that, I've taken up 47 minutes of your life. Hopefully that provides context for us in Chapter 3. Be well.